You've probably heard this a million times, right? More jobs equals a great economy. Simple. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's not always true? Today, we're going to tackle a real puzzle. How can you have record numbers of people working, but the economy itself just isn't growing? It's a weird one, so let's get into it.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at this thing called the productivity puzzle. Then we'll dive into the whole quantity versus quality of jobs debate. After that, we'll connect jobs, economic growth, and even taxes. And finally, we're going to take a look at full employment and ask, have we been thinking about it all wrong?
All right, so let's start with this productivity puzzle. Think about a place like Northern Ireland. On the surface, things look amazing. More people have jobs than ever before. You think that's a home run, right? But here's the catch. The economy itself is kind of lagging behind. It's not getting stronger at the same speed. And that gap, that weird space between lots of jobs and not so great growth, is what economists have dubbed the productivity puzzle.
And here it is, laid out plain and simple. The employment rate, it's hitting record highs. Awesome. But productivity growth, how much value we're actually creating per hour of work, it's painfully slow. It's basically flatlining. So we've got more people working, but we're not actually getting more productive. It feels like we're running in place. So what's going on here? This whole situation forces us to ask a really important question. A question that maybe we haven't been asking enough. Is any job truly better than no job? For decades, the goal was simple. Just create more jobs. Get that number up. But what if the number itself is only part of the picture? What if we need to talk about the quality of those jobs?
You know, for decades, policymakers and economists have been obsessed with one word: flexibility. The idea was, if we make the labor market more flexible, we'll get more jobs. But let's be real. What did that actually mean in practice?
Well, for a lot of people, labor market flexibility basically meant stripping away the old rules, getting rid of what they called rigidities. Things like regulations, worker protections. The goal was to prioritize the sheer quantity of jobs, sometimes at the expense of their quality or the conditions people worked in.
And this is what that often led to: the rise of what some people call bad jobs. You know the type. They're insecure, maybe temporary or part-time when you want full-time. They're lower paid. There's not much of a path to learn new skills or move up. It's the ultimate flexibility for the employer, for sure, but for the worker, it creates a ton of insecurity.
Okay, so this isn't just about individual workers. Let's zoom out and connect the dots between the health of the job market and the wealth of an entire nation. Because it turns out there's a really strong link to taxes and growth.
Take a look at this. It really shows how everything is connected. When you have higher GDP per capita, a larger labor force, more trade, the country's ability to collect taxes goes up. But look at the last line. When the unemployment rate goes up, the tax burden, or the government's ability to fund things, goes down. It's a pretty direct relationship.
So what's the crucial point here? It's that a strong labor market, one that's filled with quality jobs, is literally the foundation of a country's financial health. It's not just a nice to have, it's essential.
Okay, so we all agree we want a healthy job market. But what does that even mean? What is full employment? It's a term we hear all the time, but maybe, just maybe, economists have been measuring it the wrong way.
Seriously, when I say full employment, what do you picture? Does it mean an unemployment rate of 0%? Is that even possible or desirable? We say we want it, but do we really know what we're aiming for?
So the traditional targets have been things like NAIRU, which is a complicated way of saying they were worried about keeping inflation stable, or they'd look at long-term demographic trends. But notice what's missing. None of that says anything about how efficient the job market is. But a better target might be something called social efficiency. Instead of just worrying about inflation, this idea focuses on maximizing everybody's well-being by cutting down on waste in the labor market.
And this is where things get really interesting. Let's talk about an efficiency-based answer. What if we could find the perfect balance in the job market, the sweet spot?
So what do we mean by social efficiency? Think of it this way. It's the point where we're wasting the least amount of human potential. See, an unemployed person looking for a job, that's a non-productive use of labor, but so is an employer spending tons of time and money recruiting for an open job. The goal is to minimize both sides of that equation, the unemployed workers, which we'll call U, and the open vacancies, which we'll call V. We want to make U plus V as small as possible.
And what's amazing is that there's a really elegant mathematical solution for this. The full employment rate of unemployment, or FURU, it's just the square root of U times V. It's that simple. It's not some arbitrary number, it's a calculated point of balance.
Okay, so let's walk through the logic. Step 1, the goal is to minimize that non-productive labor we talked about, the combination of unemployed people and company recruiters. Step 2, we have a constraint. It's called the Beveridge curve, and it basically says that job seekers and vacancies have an inverse relationship. When one goes up, the other goes down. So, step 3, what's the most efficient solution? It's the point where the waste is minimized, which happens when the number of job seekers equals the number of vacancies, when U equals V. That's the balance point.
So now that we have this framework, this new economic lens, what happens when we look at history through it? How does this idea of efficiency and balance change our view of the past?
Well, researchers Pascal Michelet and Emmanuel Saez put it pretty bluntly in 2024. They said, the U.S. labor market has generally been inefficiently slack. And what that means, in plain English, is that for most of recent history, there have just been too many people looking for work compared to the number of jobs available. The scale has been tipped in one direction.
And you can see these wild swings throughout history. In 1932, during the Great Depression, the market was massively inefficiently slack. Way more job seekers than jobs. Then you jump to 1944, during World War II. It completely flips. It becomes massively inefficiently tight. Way more jobs than people to fill them. And then, more recently, 2009 in the Great Recession, we were right back to a deeply inefficiently slack market. It's been lurching from one extreme to the other. So here's the big takeaway from all of this. The unemployment rate? It isn't just a number. It's a measure of balance. It tells us which way the scales are tipped, and that's a huge shift in thinking.
The unemployment rate doesn't tell the whole story, not even close. So if that's true, what's the next question we should be asking? It's not just how do we lower unemployment, it's how do we get to a state of balance? How do we build a job market that's not too slack, not too tight, but just right? That's the real challenge.